Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, Val. This is Fountainhead Forum 161. I'm talking to John Baeza, who is a retired detective from the New York Police Department. He was there for about 17 years. We're going to talk about some of these false accusations that we've seen. John's been investigating, crimes in New York like that, especially in regard to rape accusations, stuff like that. How are you, John?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Okay, yeah. And first of all, can you tell us a little more about your entire career in law enforcement, how it started, how you ended up in New York, and tell us a little more about who you are.
I started with the New York State Department of Corrections at 18 years old. I spent 2.5 years there. And then at 20, you can become a cop in New York City. So that 2.5 years counted pension-wise for me. So after 2.5 years, I became a New York City police officer and worked my way up through detective and through the narcotics and then special victim squad. I worked as a ghetto cop my whole career. And and I spent a couple of years in Florida working as a cop. So I have about a total of over 20 years experience in law enforcement total, about 17 and a half in New York.
Yeah, and you ended up retiring because of an injury. Yeah, so, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's correct. So you worked with special victims, so you saw a lot of sexual assault and things like that, cases like that were happened, yeah.
I saw, yeah, we did any felony sexual assault, felony child abuse, and as well as rarely, but every so often, a sexual homicide case.
Oh, like where somebody rapes and then kills?
Yes, correct.
Yeah, that does happen, unfortunately, but yeah, of course, you kill the victim. I suppose they search after those things harder. So, it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Although I do think that's one reason why giving the death penalty for rape is probably not a good idea, though, because you've incentivized the person, the criminal, to kill his victim. But anyway.
Yeah, very well could be. I worry more these days about wrongful convictions, unfortunately, than I do about anything else.
That's what we wanted to get to, John. You've seen some cases. What would you say was the what do you think leads mostly to wrongful convictions? And what kind of wrongful convictions did you see?
Well, for me, what I've seen is the wrongful use of especially jailhouse snitches, forensic science, junk science, basically.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Also, misconduct, official misconduct, overzealousness on the part of police and prosecutors to try to pin whatever crime they have on someone. And that's just, again, one of my sayings is that one of the biggest problems with criminal investigations is laziness and apathy on behalf of the investigators. That's probably the biggest issue we have, is investigators just don't treat victims as if they're a member of their own family. So if you let's say I treat a victim as if it's my sister, my brother, my father, my daughter, I'm going to want to get the right guy. I'm going to want to do it the right way. I'm going to want to do it legally, and I'm going to want to put the person behind bars for as long as possible, the best way I can. Therefore, you're going to do the right thing. And I always tell people that's what you really need to do. But there are plenty of people out there who just want to go home at the end of the day. They don't care. They don't think that the person that might be innocent, that they're putting them in a cage, and they're going home to watch TV, and this person is sitting in a cage, maybe for the rest of their lives, and they just don't care. And I've seen that happen, unfortunately, much too often.
Yes, and of course, if the innocent person is in a cage, then the person who's actually guilty might still be free.
And it's happened. It's happened with many big cases. Central Park case is one of them. It's happened in cases where people are the wrong people are arrested, and the perpetrator goes loose to commit other heinous crimes.
Yeah, what are some examples of what you call junk forensics or junk science? Can you give an examples of that?
Yeah, I would say there are plenty of examples. I would say right off the bat, bite mark evidence, not necessarily just odontology or checking the teeth, matching teeth. I'm talking about bite mark, matching bite marks. That's been junk science for a long time. Fingerprints have been problematic. People thought that was a gold standard until Brandon Mayfield from the state of Washington was arrested and put in jail. They thought he was a Madrid terrorist bomber because the FBI thought that was his fingerprints. Well, it wasn't his fingerprints. So fallibility can happen anywhere. It can happen in DNA as well. It all depends on the person, the ethics of the person, how they do their science. And science is the big thing. I'm no scientist. I'll be the first to say that. I'm a detective, but I do know a little bit about science, and I know that if there is no science, there can be no forensic science. So things like, say, blood stain pattern analysis, sounds great. It's interesting. Don't get me wrong, but there's only so much you can do with it. And, for somebody's life to depend upon that, that's a burden that, well, I guess if I was a scientist doing, I would bear that burden, but I don't think that, I think that many don't concern themselves with what happens with their work. And then, of course, there are those who are totally unethical that will manufacture stuff or what they call dry lab stuff, not even test it. Just,
Yeah.
That's the guy, and we're going to make him the guy,
So they're manufacturing evidence. That's extremely troubling.
It happens.
Do you think it's more incompetence or laziness, or it's just actual malfeasance with bad intentions?
I think overall, if I were to if I had to choose overall what the problem is with the way cases are investigated, it's laziness and apathy on detectives' part. From my perspective as a detective, I think there is malfeasance going on. I think there is, ethical considerations that people are just not ethical. If men were angels, we wouldn't have this discussion. But unfortunately, men are not angels.
Yeah, that's true. That's unfortunate to know too. Fingerprints have long been. What usually happens with fingerprints is it just things are really close, but they're not exact match. Or that surprises me that they'd mess up fingerprints or DNA for that matter.
Well, with fingerprints too, where do you stop? Some places have 5 or 7 points of match. Some places have 10. Some places have 12 points that they match up. But who decides where you end? And has everybody on the earth been fingerprinted? No. So, it's like the snowflake theory. Do we know that every snowflake is identical, or is every snowflake different? No, nobody knows, So, when you talk about somebody's life on the line, whether it be the death penalty, which I'm not a proponent of, but whether it be the death penalty or caging somebody for the rest of their lives, these are important issues that we come up with.
Most definitely. It sounds like you also investigated some sexual assault cases. Where do you think this goes wrong, and how often do you think it goes wrong?
Again, this is anecdotal, so it's not scientific, obviously, from my experience. But I worked in a in the Manhattan Special Victims Squad, we had about 22 detectives, about 5,000 cases a year at least coming through. And I would say in my caseload, maybe 15, 20% of my cases are probably false reports. Every year I would have them. Sometimes I was just looking at some of the cases I had copies of, maybe 4 or 5 reports. I had 4 or 5 cases in a row that came in that were false reports. Now, what that does is people need to understand the important part of that is what that does is obviously it takes me and manpower away from real actual cases where people,
Yes.
women are raped. Rape is brutal no matter what, but children also. I investigated child abuse cases. So this takes, my caseload might be sitting on my desk. I might have 50, 100 cases sitting there, and I have to spend time now on false report cases. And, that not only did it frustrate me when I spoke to victims about it, my victims and we call them survivors now. I'm old fashioned, old timer, but my victims that I had, I spoke to them about it. I would ask them, what do you think about people coming with a false report? And not one time did any victim have any compassion for somebody who's making a false report.
Yeah, so you said 15 to 20, you thought 15 to 20% were false reports.
At least.
So do you think this was mostly just a case of having sex and then having buyer's remorse, or what do you think motivated these false reports?
Oh, there's several motivations. One could be buyer's remorse. One could be prostitution, not getting paid. One could be housing. You want new housing, so to get to the top of the list, like in New York City for a housing project, if you claim that you were raped, you may go to the top of the list to get a
Yes.
housing assignment. Also, revenge. It could also be drug use. You're getting clean, and then you go out and you get dirty. It could be children out. When I say children, 16, 17-year-old out after curfew, whatever. The motivations are, they're not endless, but the motivations are there just like for anything else. Yeah. Money, and sometimes it is money, sometimes they will name, the victim will name a person. And also what people need to understand too is it's mostly females, but I've had male false reporters as well.
Is it males false reporting on other males, or males false reporting on females?
No, males false reporting on other males I've had.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Okay, so it's gay. Yeah, another thing I also know is that also, you can usually use like a stalking accusation or something like that if you want to break a lease, if you want to get out of your apartment where you're living. Right. That's another thing that will usually get you out. The landlord will usually say, okay, we'll let you out of the lease, if you want to get out of the lease. But yeah,
that's a motivation. And I think when we get back to it, I think the first thing that detectives need to do is not to I know they have this believe first thing now, where you're supposed to believe the victim or alleged victim first. But I don't ascribe to that. I think it's poor investigative work. I think first you have to establish victimity. In other words, that the person is a victim of a crime. A crime has been committed. That's the first thing you want to do. Once you establish that, and based on physical evidence, based on your common sense, a lot of times it's just common sense, but based on that, based on not explaining away stuff because you have to believe everybody, then you can establish whether this person is a victim, whether a crime was committed, or whether they're making a false report. And I think that's what the pendulum had swung when I was in special victims. It had gone from, in the early 70s, my understanding of it is that, back then it was, there were a lot of detectives or officers who would say, ask the victim about clothing and what they were wearing and so forth, and they wouldn't understand the motivation of rapists. But the pendulum, by the time I got there, had swung to most of the detectives I knew would just take the alleged victim or complainant, I would like to call it a complainant, they would take their word for it and go with it. And I've worked with them, and I've found evidence on cases where I'd have to present it to the detective and say, listen, here's the evidence that it's a false report. And they'd still be hesitant with physical evidence. They'd still be hesitant, you know. So.
Yeah. Do you suppose the police officers will get more skeptical of complaints as time goes on, or will it go the other way?
Oh, I think it'll go the way, I guess, that society pushes them rather than good training would mandate. I think, you know what I mean? I think believe first, if that's what people are teaching. I see that being taught a lot in these trainings and stuff. If they're teaching them that, then that's what they're going to do. They're going to go and just believe everybody. And it's easy. If you're lazy, it's easy to just take a statement and believe somebody rather than think and use your head and question stuff.
Yes.
And, you know, and to confront somebody else. I mean, you think as a detective, that would be something you'd be used to, right? But a lot of detectives don't want to confront anything, you know, and they don't want to confront people, and they want to say, well, you know, I had for instance, I had a complainant that said she was pushed onto a rooftop on a housing project that had tar and black rocks on it and stuff, and she had a white jacket on, and the jacket was on at the time and so forth. They went over the story, and then I look at the evidence, and the jacket is perfectly clean. It looks brand new. It just happened right then, you know. And then when you ask the question, all of a sudden it's like, you know, the complainant starts to say, well, blah, blah, blah. And then at some point, when I believe that they're not telling me the truth, I have to read them the rights, because they're a suspect in falsely reporting a case, which is a crime. So I read them the rights, and this is no joke. Typically, I would leave the room for a couple of minutes, come back, and whether it would be a woman or man, mostly women, they would be either crying or they'd come back. I'd come back and they'd give me a full confession. I mean, full that, you know, the Manhattan DA was the only DA's office that would prosecute these cases, by the way, as well. Back then, the Bronx DA and stuff, they wouldn't even prosecute false reports. But the Manhattan DA would only take it, not on a hunch. You had to give them, we had some good DAs, and you had to give them, you know, a story with physical evidence, stuff that made sense. So therefore, is the job easy? No. I mean, does it take common sense and maybe sometimes good detective work? Yeah. But if you're lazy, you're apathetic, you give the complainant a statement. Here, make a statement, write it down. That way I don't even have to type it, because back when I was there, you didn't have audio or video. So you type statements. People didn't even want to type. They're too lazy. So what do? Here, write this statement up. I'll just attach to the form. Well, in a way that, you know, some people think that's good, but I want to ask my questions. I have important questions to ask. And if you're a real victim, I want to ask you about what did the rapist do? What was his, you know, what questions did he ask? What you know, what were his behaviors? Because I can link that to other cases, maybe, you know, if that's a true crime. You know, I want to know, you know, words he said, actions he took, MO, signature, stuff like that. I can link to other cases, and also put in my own case folder so that somebody else, if they're sharp enough, they could link it as well.
Certainly. You know, I've also heard, you know, after a while, when you've worked as a police officer for a while, you learn to read body language, and you can kind of tell when people are lying and when they're telling the truth. Is that true or not?
I don't believe it is. Some people do. You know, I don't believe that body language is, and I'll give you an example that I like to use with people that I learned from Jerry Spence, you know, the attorney. He had a jury one time, and he kept looking at this one juror, and he said, "This guy is not going to be ruled in my favor," whatever, you know. And because the guy had his arms crossed in front of him, so the guy did rule, you know, nobody was a holdout. They ruled that it was an acquittal. So he asked the jury, so, well, you know, why were you holding your hands like that? He goes, hey, us fat guys got to have a place for us to put our arms sometimes. So we put it on our belly, fold it across, you know. So I'm not a big believer in body language, nor am I a believer at all in statement analysis. I've seen that detectives I know do that. And I would look at the statement. They would tell me, look at this. The statement analysis says this. I read the statement. I said, of course it does. All you have to do is read the statement, go in there and ask the questions. You got to ask the right questions, right? It's just a common thing. But you know what? It's just like common sense. Common sense is not common, unfortunately. So,
what usually happens when you find out that, you know, the person who's made the complaint has now been lying?
in my cases, they are arrested for falsely reporting a crime. It's a misdemeanor. It was a misdemeanor in New York. I think it still is. I don't know for sure.
Yeah,
in a long time, but I made many arrests. And in fact, pretty much every case that I can think of that had a false report was closed out with an arrest of that person, whether it be a female or male. Like I said, mostly 99% females, but they would be arrested for false reporting a crime. If it were my case, or in my squad, there were several others that really were very good detectives, and they were very good at investigating these types of cases and getting them done so that we could get back to work on our brutal cases that we needed to prioritize.
What would usually tip you off that a complaint was false?
Well, number one, there would be red flags that you would have. Now, every red flag does not mean that it's false, but red flag would be something like the person was out past curfew, or the person is seeking, like I said, housing, the motives. So if the motive was there for something that a revenge motive, or even a husband-wife thing, where I had a couple of cases where the wife was getting clean from drugs or whatever, and started using again, didn't want to tell the husband, and she was out for 3 days using drugs. Well, those 3 days turned out that she said she was kidnapped for 3 days and raped. So, you know, those things are red flags. So what you want to do is, of course, you got to determine that they're actually, just because it's a red flag doesn't mean anything. So you determine. So what I would ask is, okay, you were there for 3 days. You're in a room, you get them to tell their story, and then you say, okay, describe the room for me, where you were at. You were in there for 3 days, right? Where did you go to the bathroom? And sometimes you ask a question like that, and they're like, they don't, because they don't pre-plan the story in their head. And I'll give you an example. My partner, not me, I give my credit to my partner on this one, but there was a baby who was kidnapped from Central Park, allegedly kidnapped. In the middle of the day, no witnesses, nothing, which is highly unusual. So clearly, this was problematic. So the homicide squad went in back then, and they interviewed the parents of this infant that was kidnapped, supposedly kidnapped, right? And the parents didn't say anything. So they were moving the parents to a new hotel, because the parents were in New York to visit, they said, for a week or 10 days. And they had all their luggage in the police interview room and stuff, and the mother was in one room, the father in the other. So my partner went in, and he's the one I learned everything from. But he went in, and he said, could I speak with the mother? And, you know, the old timers were like, well, you're not going to get anything out of her. So he went in there. Bottom line is, 15 minutes later, he comes out. He's got a map of where the baby's body is up in Canada, in the ditch, dead, what happened, and all the information. And people are like, well, how'd you get that? And what he did was he talked to the mother, and behind her was all the suitcases. And he asked her, he said, okay, you know, you were here for, you know, spend 10 days down here in New York, blah, 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 with the baby. Yes. Okay. Is that all your luggage behind you? You got anything missing? Anything at all? No, that's it all. Okay. Could you pull out the baby's clothes for me, and diapers and whatever you got. That was it. There were none in there. So she broke down, and that was it. So it shows you that that's a very, very explanatory case of how you ask the right questions, and then you get that answer that you're seeking. You get the truth. The answer you're seeking is the truth. You're not seeking a particular answer. You're seeking the truth. And he got the truth out of that. And sure enough, when you call RCMP up, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, they find a dead baby in the side of the road up in Canada. So, bravo to him. And I'm glad I chose him to be my partner, because I learned a lot from him. And that's how I progressed my career.
Wow. That's an interesting, yeah. Wow. It's funny because a lot of, people don't prepare for every question when they try to cover things up.
And some do.
It's amazing how, like not having baby clothes. That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to ask those, you got to just kind of use, it's a little bit of common sense, right? We got to kind of just think, well, you're down here for 10 days, your red flag is that there's no witnesses, more than likely this baby was not taken in the middle of Central Park at a very busy area. Nobody saw anything. So you know that the parents are probably lying. Okay. So what do? You say, okay, well, where are the clothes for the baby? So you can apply that type of logic to every case you investigate. And I think, I'm not saying that I'm perfect, or that I can get every false report case, or I can pick up everything, but we're not dealing with super villains here most of the time. Okay. Like from Batman, the super villains, you're dealing with people, and they make errors. So and that's what I've noticed in my whole career, is that it's really rarely something out of a TV movie where you're dealing with like a Hannibal Lecter, or something like that. It's just, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So getting back to the false, we talked about false rape complaints. Are these often? Are these often, say, sometimes after a long period? I mean, they might allege a rape happened 6 months ago, or and I don't know if there's what kind of. I mean, that's usually a red flag too, right? If they've waited a long time.
Yes. Again, it's a red flag. Does it always mean it? Of course not. But typically, that's a red flag that will pop up. If somebody says, I was brutally raped a year ago, it's a red flag that you want to it needs to be explained. What's the reason that you're coming in now, and why? And, it needs to be explained. It has to be explained. And, those cases, in many of those cases that were reporting late, like 6 months or a year, they were false reports. Can I say all of them? Of course not. There were some, for some reason or other, it was a victim, and they came in for whatever reason. They didn't report it right away. They came in, but it is a red flag, and time is definitely something that you would look at. And again, nothing is scientific here. That's important for me to point out, because, detective work isn't scientific, but you do the best you can to mitigate any problems, any false reports you get. But like you said, that's a red flag. Timeliness is a red flag. Yes.
Yeah. What are some other big red flags like that?
I would say, if you made a complaint of a false report prior to the current complaint, that's a red flag. Again, doesn't mean a false reporter can't get raped. It just means that it's definitely a red flag. If you come up with an arrest on your record or a report somewhere that comes up and it shows that you've made a false report before, well, past behavior is sometimes the best predictor of future behavior. So we have to keep that in mind. So yes, that's a red flag as well.
Are there a lot of repeat offenders with false reports?
I I didn't come across any repeat offenders. I'm not saying that somebody else didn't come across them or that they weren't um, observed by another detective or something like that. But I can't remember anybody that reported to me twice or that I reported to my squad twice. But there were some that had been arrested for it before that maybe another detective investigated that. I remember that, they found out that they had an arrest for a false report before. But what would happen is sometimes the detective would not run the victim's name through the database to find out. And back then we had a simple database, but you would find out if they had an arrest or a complaint. If you're not a good detective, then you're not going to run it. And that, as sad as that sounds, that happened quite often.
Well, also, I suppose you could have, people who make false reports, but maybe they made a false report in Boston, then they made a false report in New York, then they made a false report in Philadelphia. And would you have access to all that or not in New York? You'd have no way of knowing, I guess.
Yeah, especially not back then. Now, I don't know. I don't even think now, but I don't know what they have. They have what they call the real-time crime center, which is what I kind of wish they had back then, where you could plug a name or a case or something into the database and you pull everything up on one computer. Back then we had like 3 computer systems to go through for 3 different things. And so no, we wouldn't even know. Sometimes we wouldn't even know in our own squad what was going on, let alone what was going on in the Bronx or Brooklyn or Queens. So what was going on in Rhode Island or Massachusetts? Nah, and no. So you're correct. It would be very difficult to track that.
Yeah, you said you'd have arrest people who make false reports. How often were they actually prosecuted or charged, and what would usually happen to them?
Well, in Manhattan, during my time in Manhattan, they would be charged. They would be arrested by me, and the DAs would prosecute, but it was a misdemeanor. So if you're, I don't know what happened at the end with the cases, but I'm sure it was just a slap on the wrist. It's New York back in the 90s, and it's a misdemeanor. I'm sure they didn't do any time, but the important thing was to make a record of it, so it's on the record, and that way, if they do make a complaint and the detective is smart enough to run the record, it'll be on there, so that if they do that, like we said, if they do make another report, it'll be on their arrest report that they have this false report arrest.
Oh, certainly. What do you think? So it might end up being a fine, or it might end up being, I don't know, probation or
probably
community service.
I don't think anybody went to jail for it other than overnight. I don't think anybody did any jail time for anything that I arrested. For any false report I arrested them for, because they're all misdemeanors. But the intent of it was that they committed a crime. That's number one, and number two is to get that on record, because, like you were talking about before, this is a big red flag that you need to have available to other investigators, so when they see this, they'll know, okay, this person made a false report before. Let's see if this one is a false report. Let's you really got to perk your antenna up and start looking very closely at cases when somebody's done it and made a report like this in the past. Psychiatric troubles doesn't always mean that somebody is making a false report. It's just, that's also a red flag too. If somebody has had troubles in the past or psychiatric troubles or whatever. Again, there's millions of people across the, we probably all need to talk to a therapist, but the main thing is, if you have these troubles and they're significant, then that's a flag that you need to raise up and say, okay, does this have anything to do with this report that's being made? And once you eliminate it, then you go on and you investigate the case, and you try to arrest. If it's a rapist, you try to do your best to arrest them. If it's not, then you, like what I would do is make the arrest, go on and start working on my cases where I'm trying to chase the guy that, going out there and he's attacking. I've had serial rape cases. He's attacking 16 women at gunpoint. I need to catch that guy. I don't need to waste time on these false reports that come in. But you'll see that people will just, it's an automatic thing where you are just people do not love you when you come out, or when I come out and say, hey, false reports are 15% of my casework. And I could pull out all my case, even if I showed it to them, it doesn't matter. They don't want to hear it. Other detectives didn't want to hear it. They don't want to hear it. I had a case where I was just assisting a woman, and we talk about the rent issue, right? The want to get a new housing or whatever. So you claim rape. Well, there was a woman who claimed rape, and I was just assisting. And I know the story, it was many years ago, but the story just didn't sit right with me. And the woman, she was on welfare. And when you're on welfare in New York, that welfare card is everything. So because you use it to get your money, right? Every Friday, whatever it is. So she said her purse was taken by the whole purse was taken by this alleged rapist, and that in it was definitely her welfare card and so forth. So when the detective took the victim to the hospital, the alleged victim, I stood around and I just knocked on the door. I talked to the husband. I said, I just wondered if your wife left her purse anywhere. And he goes, yeah, you know what? That's interesting. She put her purse under the mattress today. And he goes, I don't know why. I said, well, do you mind if I have it? It's evidence. It could be evidence. And he handed it to me. And of course, what was in it? A welfare card. So she obviously said that was taken. She was very clear. I presented that to the detective. While he was interviewing her, I called him outside. And he still was like, no, this has got to be, she's telling the, I'm like, I don't want to say names. So I was like, no, this is the evidence. I don't know what, I didn't know what to tell him. But eventually, of course, during the interview, she admitted it. And it was clear that this was the reason. She told him the motivation to get new housing. She was going to be, I guess, kicked out of there or something. I forget. Anyway, but so these are the types of things that would happen with these false report cases over and over and over again. In the meantime, my victims who were victims of a serial rapist, or just the rapist, didn't matter, rapists, or child victims who were sexually assaulted, their cases go without attention while I'm busy dealing with these false report cases. And that's what's so frustrating about them, because the real victims don't get attention.
That is what, you end up wasting time. It's because you have limited resources. Right. It sounds like you. How fast do you usually figure out that these reports are false? Is it like within maybe 2 hours, or is it by the end of the day, or does it take a few days? Or
most of mine, in the beginning, it was a little slower. I was new, so I was getting used to it. But most of them, right away. You just got to get to that point to make sure that that it is false. But I would say mine would, by the end of the day. I can remember one case when I was newer. There was a person named who wasn't really even a person, and I had to go through it, and it took me about, I think, 2 days, and then to make the arrest for false report after going through it. But they, they're not particularly difficult. It didn't take you to be a super detective to to do it. It just took the effort and also the knowledge that people do lie, and that if they lie to you and they're committing a crime, a false report, it's okay to confront them. You know, it's okay to make the arrest and to get on with helping everybody else. But like I said, then and even now, it's always believe first, and that is just poor investigative work and poor investigative training, is to believe somebody first. You just don't do that.
Yeah. Do you think the profession has been maybe taken over also by people who would you say might you they're activists before they're detectives? They want to just, they're just on this crusade to convict every person as opposed to trying to figure out what the truth is?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's probably part of our, I mean, I guess down to the base of it's probably part of our indoctrination of public education system, and how that all works. We're indoctrinated with that, and people are indoctrinated with TV news, movies, and so forth.
Yeah.
And if a department takes a certain stance, whether it could be activist stance or whatever, believe first, and they're training that way, it's that's no good. I mean, I remember we had a 3-day sex crimes course, and we had like 2 minutes on false reports. 2 minutes, and it wasn't anybody that knew anything about false reports who presented it. It was just quick. It was, I mean,
and often you hear it more with maybe the detectives aren't the activists, but you sometimes hear about prosecutors being activists. What would you say about that?
I've seen it, but there are, and there's motivations behind that. Sometimes it's popularity, sometimes it's book deals, sometimes it's whatever when they retire and get out. But I've seen that happen in cases that I've investigated, even after an expert. Yeah, I've seen that.
Well, and because so many prosecutors are elected, you often hear that, the advertisement for the prosecutor, yes, tough on crime, and if the prosecutor has a better record, he's perceived as being tough on crime. I don't know if that's you often see that when prosecutors are running for office,
Yeah, I mean, well, now in New York, the prosecutors say, like, I guess it's Alvin Bragg. Now, I wouldn't, as a detective, I wouldn't deal with him. I would deal with the appointed, assistant district attorneys, and I liked a lot of them. They were pretty good. But, and same down here in Florida. But I worked on a case recently down here in Florida, a local case. I won't get into it too much, but I'll just tell you that basically the police failed to look at in-camera footage of a suspect. Now, this is somebody who admitted in the car, made spontaneous statements, was not under Miranda or anything, that he committed the crime, but they never took the time to listen to an hour and 4-minute audio video because, well, why? Laziness, apathy, we've got no time for that. So they never listened to it. But in the meantime, they let the guy go. He wanted his right to remain silent, which is fine. And then, of course, 2 days later, he gets a lawyer. They never spoke to him. And they said, well, we have no mens rea. We have no guilty mind. But it turns out nobody looked at the video footage, which, I've looked at every part of the file, every case, autopsy, everything. And that particular video footage, I sat there. It took me over 2 hours. I didn't transcribe. I had the thing transcribed by a third-party service. And this guy makes spontaneous utterances clearly that, he killed this girl, stabbed her in the neck, and that, that he killed her. And then, and the ME said the same thing. But for some reason, they won't reopen the. I know the reason. They won't reopen the case because why? It makes them look bad, right? For 2 years, it happened in December of Christmas Day of 2021. They closed the case in August 23, this past August. Lack of mens rea, guilty mind, culpability. Yet not one person looked at that in-camera video of him in the car, and he wasn't being questioned. he was in custody, but he wasn't being questioned. So if you have custody and questioning, you have to have Miranda, correct, no doubt. But he wasn't being questioned, and they were clearly, when I listened to the thing, the deputies were clearly ordered not to question him, and he just, like I said, if the detective would have listened to it, he would have known that night that he had enough to make a probable cause for an arrest. And you're talking about the same detective that did not know that a day later the victim had died, and talked to the parents after that and said, "Oh, how's your daughter doing? Is she better? Is she doing all right?" And they're like, "We just came from the funeral service." I mean, you're the lead detective on a homicide. You don't have like 100 of them. It's not like you're inundated. You got to know this stuff. It's frustrating for me. I don't mean to seem too frustrated, but that's very frustrating for me.
Yeah. How many cases are detectives working at one time? I mean, how many cases would you work on in one day? I mean,
it depends. Special victims, you could work 2-3 cases in one day. A friend of mine, he worked in New York City. It was much busier, but he worked in each precinct has its own detective squad. They handle the homicides. The homicide squad in New York City, they assist you. They assist the squads with homicides, but the homicide is assigned to a particular precinct detective. So anyway, my friend was a detective in the 3-4 precinct, which is very busy, Washington Heights. They would have 125 homicides a year up there. And one night he had at least three homicide scenes he had to go to at the same time by himself, driving himself in his car to attend 3 homicide crime scenes by himself, because everybody else is busy doing their own homicides. So that's an example of back in the 90s. Now, again, today it's different. There are fewer homicides. So I think it's much more doable today, if you will, to investigate something.
Yeah. So, what happens with some of these cases where they start to go far and you think they're false? I mean, how many false convictions did you see, for example, or convictions that you thought were false?
I know I saw one, again, when it's not your case, especially in the NYPD, it's not your case and you are not, they're not letting you get involved with it. But I saw one case that I thought the guy should have been in jail still. He was a rapist, but the behavior of that rape, the comments that I heard made by the alleged victim and so forth, made me believe it was a consensual encounter. I didn't do the interview. I listened to it, but I was not involved directly, but that was a time where it was a big thing about parolees going out and violating parole and reoffending. And he was a parolee. He was a sex offender. He was a brutal sex offender. And this wasn't a brutal offense, but that's not the only reason. There's much more to it. But they went with, this is going to make the paper. This is big. And the guy saw time in jail. Now, no matter what I say about the guy should have been in jail still, I don't believe that in this case that he should have been jailed for this. The law made the law stronger that it kept him in jail. But I felt this was consensual. But again, not my case. NYPD is very, very insular, even within your own squad. So you're not going to be, unless it's your partner, or like maybe the guy that I showed the purse to or something. It's very hard to influence others.
And if you're going to make a rape complaint, you would do it, against somebody who was not particularly sympathetic, and somebody who's on parole is not going to be as sympathetic as somebody who has no record whatsoever.
Right. But I think in this case, I'm thinking about this case in particular. You're correct there, but in this case in particular, this was just this guy hung out it happened in Central Park, so that's big. Anything that happens in Central Park is huge, and it was just a consensual encounter. The guy was there, and the woman was there, and people were getting together, and like I said, it was consensual. I don't. It wasn't my belief that he wasn't involved, that he didn't have relations with her. It was just that it was consensual. That's all.
Yeah.
And but
this is something else too, though, that I think is an important issue, is what I would call the watering down of the term sex offender. We have people who are convicted of rape who get charged as sex offenders, but we also have people who might stop their car by the side of the road. They absolutely have to positively have to take a piss. They take a piss. Some cop pulls over and says, "Hey, you're taking a, you're not supposed to be doing that." And what do you think about that? This person is not a dangerous criminal,
No.
And yet you're going to ruin their life for it.
Right. All of a sudden they're exposing themselves and so forth. And, it makes you think when you got to take a leak when you're driving along. Am I really going to stop on the side of the road? Because the police still in this country have all the power. Now, people that know me know that I'm not a huge fan of the majority or a lot of the police. I do like a lot of police, but I just call it what it is. The truth is the truth. And I'm not a big authoritarian. I didn't become a cop to be a big authoritarian. I became a cop for family history. And then working in Harlem, let me tell you something. You're not going to go to the corner and tell somebody, "Hey, get off the corner and do this, do that." I'll tell you to go screw yourself. And what are you going to do then? You're not going to hit somebody. You're going to get your ass beat if you do. So I don't know. It's just, it's different where I had a different experience, and I'm glad I did. But I see, like when I work down here in Florida, you go to a call. I went to a call where a senile woman had shot a 22 at a tree or something. Some guy's taking I don't know what to call them, M14. You think I should know that, right? One of them little rifles or a shotgun out of the back of his truck. I'm like, hold on, what? Put that back. You don't need that. Just take it easy. Take a breath. You don't have to go in like you know what it is? Once we start dressing and acting like the military, that's what police become. They become the military, and they become an occupying force. And who do they occupy? Us, the citizens. So they become an occupying force, and it's sad. I mean, that's sad.
Well, it's also becoming, an issue is sometimes where they're giving this military surplus to police departments or anything like that. I mean, there is no police department anywhere that needs a tank.
No,
there just isn't. You have your guns, you have your. Well, what do you even think about SWAT teams? Because some people say that about SWAT teams.
When I worked on patrol, we rarely did search warrants on our own, but when we did them by ourselves with our captain or whatever, and we would do them. We had what we called emergency service. Other places would call it SWAT, but back then it was different. It wasn't like it is now, where they're going in with helmets and their tanks and grenades, and they're pulling a Waco every 2 minutes on everybody that's for minor offenses. It's a sad situation.
Yes, and the SWAT team, they have the joke is, they got an overdue library book. It's like, so it is problematic. Although also too, though, isn't it true though that a lot of ex-military do become police officers, or is that incorrect?
No, I believe that would be, especially now, it would be correct. I think after 9/11, it's probably immensely correct, because a lot of people came out of the military, become police officers. I'm no expert on it, but that's what I think. I mean, when I worked, there were guys in homicide that were from Vietnam era and stuff, but not that we didn't. There was not that militaristic attitude that I see or I saw even down here when I worked here in the 2005 to 2008, whatever it was down here. I saw people wanting to be, I want to be a sniper, and I'm like, what? Go to the army. You want to be an army man? Go to the army. Don't be a police officer. It's totally different thing. You got to learn how to use your mouth. And I think Sing Sing helped me with that. Working in a correctional facility at 18, you don't have a gun or anything, so you learn how to use your mouth, or and that at any minute the prisoners could take over. So I think that helped a lot with my ability to talk to people. Now, I'm not perfect. So we all make mistakes. We all can lose our heads sometimes. But gee whiz, this military aspect is not good.
Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder how many police officers do also have backgrounds as prison guards. That might be an interesting training for them.
Yeah, I know the one big agency I know of that has you go to work in a jail first is the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office, and that's probably maybe the third largest police department in the country. And I think they have you start off in the jail first, and then you can go to patrol. You're trained in both, but their academy, you just don't go out and become a cop. You got to go through the jail first. I always thought it was a good idea. Now, I'm not, again, I'm not Mr. Expert on this stuff, but I always thought that was a good idea. Because I work with a lot of, not a lot of guys, but I work with guys that were either New York City correction officers or New York State correction officers prior to being cops and detectives with the New York City Police Department. And they always seem to be just a little bit better at diffusing situations and so forth.
Yeah. So you learn how to de-escalate. Yeah. These guys are mad. They're wanting to beat each other up, and you just learn how to calm them down, which I think is a very important skill. Yeah, because as you said, the prisoners can theoretically take over if they just organize themselves. But yeah,
I mean, again, one thing I want to make clear though is that while I have been hypercritical or maybe super critical of police and police actions, investigations, I do believe that I work with some of the greatest police officers, the most restrained police officers are real heroes. And they kind of taught me how to be maybe a real man, a real honorable person, a real honorable policeman.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate to work in the ghetto with these guys that are, I was a mediocre street cop. Some of these guys were fantastic, but you know what? Corruption and brutality within, I worked in a precinct less than 1 square mile, 90 homicides a year, very busy. Everybody's on top of each other, so everybody knows what everybody's doing. For 3 years, I worked there 3.5 years. I never saw any corruption, and I never saw any brutality take place. I saw people, maybe try to get out of hand, cops, just getting caught up. Maybe they want to punch, they want to do it, and other cops pulling them back. And I remember in particular a police officer I knew, a hero police officer, really. He was shot in the stomach, while his two partners, also two just decorated cops in my precinct, they were there when he got shot, and they apprehend the guy. You think that, maybe they shot the guy, right? They jumped him, grabbed the gun, they got the guy, they took the police officer to the hospital. Luckily his belt buckle saved him, and nobody said anything to these guys. Everybody was like, yeah, that's heroic, You don't need to always go blasting away. You choose what you need to do, and you don't always need to be having your gun in somebody's face constantly. I don't know.
Yeah, it seems to, the saying that, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
That's a good one.
It's not always the best thing, I sometimes what gets me too is when I always hear a case about a police officer shooting a dog. And I just say the only time I think you should ever shoot a dog is if you see a big dog attacking a small child. But other than that, there's no reason ever to shoot a dog. Now, multiple dogs, yes, but just one dog.
Yeah, my experience, I worked on the job training, worked on the Lower East Side, and one time a pit bull, I think it was, had its jaws. Actually, they had to surgically take the jaws out of the child's arm, but that wasn't shot. But that was, to me, that was the right thing. And then one time when I worked in the 3-2 precinct, they call it the Tomb of Gloom. That was the precinct I worked out up in Harlem. 27 line of duty deaths in that one little precinct alone, more than any other in the United States, believe it or not. But the dog, we're talking about dogs now. One time we had a dog ran loose, and it was eating up other dogs, like chewing them apart, and also chasing people and stuff. So they had to call the emergency service unit, and they had the dart gun, and they know how to deploy it. They know all that crap. When you're a ghetto cop, you don't know anything about that, but they deployed it and they shot it. I don't know if they killed it or not. I have no idea. But all I know is that we got out on the street and cops were running up on top of the cars, on the roofs of cars, because the dog was like running around. Cops were so scared, but nobody shot the dog until the emergency service unit came by. So, like I said, my experience, I'm fortunate to have that experience. I wasn't trained the wrong way. There's either trained or untrained, and I believe that I was trained and trained properly. So,
yeah, and sometimes there are ways sometimes to de-escalate with a dog too. You just have to, but it's not something everybody knows how to do. And of course, it depends on how big or small the dog is.
Yeah, like I said, I never really had I never had an issue with having dogs shot in my presence.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. One thing we hear, another thing we hear too, about, getting back to the rape issue is, I always hear, like, well, X percentage of rapes are never reported. How does anybody know can anybody possibly know what percentage of rapes aren't reported if the rapes aren't reported?
You don't know.
Who's counting these unreported rapes?
It's all guesswork. Nothing.
Yeah, I mean,
I've had one victim of a serial rapist. One. Now we're talking about all my victims. I've had one victim who said originally that she wasn't going to report it because it was just, she was the wrong person. She, great girl and everything, but she just said, I wasn't going to report it because there's a time and I don't want to go to she wasn't worried about being believed. She just thought that's too much time. But she realized that there was a serial rapist going around, so she thought it was important to get into the hospital and report it to the police, and she did. But I don't know. Again, I don't know. You're right. There's no way to know the reporting, and it's and false reporting. That's anecdotal. Like I could tell you 15, 20%. I could tell you that the 2% report rate that's been reported constantly since 1971 or whatever, that is a circular that's false. First of all, it came from a speech that a judge made. He made it up himself, and it was a circular thing that everybody got a hold of and just started passing it around that this is the truth. And it wasn't. I mean, there are studies out there that show the 50% rate. I looked at one study. I did an article on a literature review on false reports, and I looked at one article on emergency room victims for rape brought to emergency room, and I was reading it for just that, the injuries and stuff. And it turns out that when I looked at the article, I calculated 13% of the victims in the hospitals that they looked at were false reporters. So out of the whole study that they did, and it wasn't about false reports, there was a 13% false report rate just out of that one study. So, they're there. They happen. People can't deny it. But what's wrong is the way you attack the investigation. You cannot come forth and automatically just believe everything that somebody says. I mean, that's ridiculous on its face.
Yeah, I guess you probably learn that, you always have to investigate whatever anybody says, no matter who it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what percentage of rapists would you say are serial rapists? I mean, I suspect we probably have lots of, I mean, or do you have any numbers?
I would say it's dropped significantly. And the reason I say that is because I think that actually the completed rapes, there may be people are people throughout the years, right? The motivation behind rape is not just sex alone. There's power, there's reassurance, there's different motivations, and people can and rapists can be mixed between these motivations. So you have basically like 4 different types that I've seen. You have a power reassurance rapist, somebody that's called a gentleman rapist. Okay, somebody that needs to be reassured during his rapes. Okay, then you have a power assertive rapist, somebody who wants to assert a manliness or whatever. Then you have the anger retaliatory rapist, somebody's very angry. Okay, those are once you hit that, you're talking rare. And then you have the sadistic rapist. Now, people get this wrong all the time. Sadistic means getting sexual gratification from the suffering of a victim. So the victim must be alive. So those who say like, oh, Ted Bundy's sadistic, Ted Bundy would knock his victims and kill his victims out first and then defile them and do whatever he did.
Yes.
So there's no sadism there. But anyway, those are, unfortunately for us, those are the rarest types, the anger and the sadistic. But the other two, the reassurance and the assertive, you see them. What I don't know is how the new forensic genealogy stuff, the new DNA stuff, how all that's affecting. I mean, it doesn't, I don't think it affects, I'm not a psychologist either. I don't think it affects the mindset so much as how the rapes are perpetrated or sexual assaults are perpetrated. So, yeah, I'm kind of wondering. We deal with mostly acquaintance rapes. Those are the majority of the rapes that you have. Acquaintance rapes. People that will force himself on somebody else or whatever, and that happens. It happens quite often. Does it always? Can those be false reports? Quite often they can be.
Yeah.
But fortunately, serial rapes are as many as I've been involved in, and other members of my unit. They're few and far between. Fortunately.
Yeah. So it really is mostly where the rapist does know the victim, or the victim knows the rapist.
Yeah. Yes. And that's a homicide too. Homicide is the same. Serial homicide, stranger homicide is very, very rare. Mostly it's.
Is it usually a boyfriend girlfriend situation where the boy just wants to take things too far, or is it sometimes just they happen to know each other?
Know each other, parties, stuff like that, out nightlife and so forth. And there are, some people don't carry themselves. Some men don't carry themselves as gentlemen. Let's face it.
Yeah.
And that happens. So, again, that also can lead to false reports. We know that. That's why it's so important to get down to the baseline to figure out what we have here. Do we have a victim? Do we have a crime? And I think you bring up a very good point. I mean, this is important stuff to talk about. A lot of people don't talk about this stuff.
Yeah, what do you think also about, we sometimes, we make the joke is if two lesbians get drunk and have sex, which one's the rapist? What do you think, about, encounters where sometimes, both parties are are intoxicated, or you you end up sometimes, you certainly hear the stories about what you call the roll and scream. The female wakes up and looks over and says, "Oh my God, I just."
Yeah. Well, now see, now in the time, back in the time when it was just, I don't want to say merely alcohol, but alcohol. A lot of times when people say they just woke up and all of a sudden there's this person or this guy raping them. A lot of times,
well, it could just be the person's asleep, and
yeah, and no, and I got to be quite clear here. Back then, this is before. I'm not talking about on the influence of these GHB and all this stuff, because that came after me.
Yeah.
Okay? So I don't know about all that.
Yeah. Certainly, I think spiking drinks and stuff like that. That's a big deal.
But blacking out while being raped. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, and I'm not demeaning anybody. I'm not trying to belittle anything. But also, when I hear that, somebody, I woke up and the guy was raping me. Well, why did you wake up then? Why not wake up when he first started the act? And there's questions I want answered first before I start believing that. I need to know. I need to ask more questions. So that's what happened back then.
Well, it's also a question. Why are you responsible for a car accident if you're legally intoxicated, but you're not responsible for this decision if you're legally intoxicated?
Right. I don't. Again, those are issues that are even. To me, like I said, when I looked at it, well, all I would look for is your intent, and if both parties are drunk or a party was drunk and there's no intent there, then I'm going to go to the DA and I'm going to say, listen, they were both drunk and this is what I found, and and that's it. If I'm called to testify, if the case gets brought before a jury, I'm just going to tell the truth of what I find or my findings. But yeah, those are difficult. Those are difficult cases, and I understand. The trepidation with them is that, like you said, how responsible is somebody if they're drunk or whatever? Well, if you're not drunk and somebody is drunk and you take advantage of them, or you rape them while they're not capable of giving you consent, you have to show me that. If I see that, then that's an issue. That's a problem. That could be a crime. Well, that is a crime without consent. But most of the rapes I investigated were not as cloudy as that, thankfully.
Yeah,
I gotta admit,
Yeah, what do you think we can do to reduce the number of false reports and the number of false accusations?
What would I do? Is that what you're asking me?
Yeah, what could we do legally or culturally, or how would we fix this?
There's a way to investigatively. The best way is to, I've written stuff on, I taught stuff on it, but anyway, it's to first establish whether you have a victim. So training is of the utmost, and they don't train on this. Nobody trains on how to determine whether something's a false report or not. So once we get past that hump, and you can train somebody on, okay, how do you determine whether something is a false report? What do you look for? What are the red flags? Know that the red flags don't definitely mean that you have a false report, but that your antenna should go up. You should start thinking about these things. That kind of training is necessary. But in the past 25, 30 years, I haven't seen anything change in the training. I've tried to do it myself. I've written papers on it. I've taught people from here to Mexico. Quite frankly, I've even talked to, I remember doing a seminar for the International Association of Forensic Nurses years ago. And I thought I was going to, I thought they were going to throw things on me, but they didn't, because they understood once you talk about victims, real victims, actual victims, not getting their cases, not getting attention because manpower is sucked off because of these false cases, people start to get an appreciation for it. Once I talked to people about how I spoke to my actual victims in cases about these false reports and their reaction to it, and that they were they were very disturbed by the fact that somebody would make a false report, and they all wanted the person to be locked up. I never came across a victim of mine that I questioned. I asked a lot of them in passing what they thought of these false reports, and not one of them ever told me that, oh yeah, they had compassion.
Yeah.
They did not.
Yeah. And I guess another question is what do you think we can do to get really great police work out of it and get the best out of our officers?
I've been thinking about that since I retired, and we're talking about 23 years ago when I really retired from the NYPD. I think that you really need to have. I think you need to have like a detective college. Like you have a police academy, you go to police to learn how to be a police officer, you go for 6 months to the academy, right? I think to be a detective, you need much more than that. I think you need to go and have maybe, I don't know, the police department provides, I don't know, whatever, but you need a formal type of education that trains you to be an investigator and teaches you a little bit about everything, science, about the tools that you could possibly use and the proper procedures. And that is not run by an activist from one side or the other side, whatever side. It's run by people who want to solve cases properly to find the truth. I think that's always been my thing, is we search for the truth. Look for the truth. When you find the truth, hold on to it, because that's all you got. That's all you got.
Well, it sounds great. Yeah. And of course, I don't know if a lot of police officers are like you, though, your dad, your grandfather, stuff like that too. I wonder how often that happens, but yeah, I'm also curious to know, what TV or movies do you think get portray police officers accurately, and what do you think completely miss the mark?
Okay, I will tell you that I'm not a big TV or movie watcher, but I've seen them. I've seen the TV shows. My number one show for anybody, if they like to watch TV or movies, is to watch the show The Wire, HBO show The Wire, about Baltimore and about the failed drug war, and also about homicides and investigations. And that is probably, to me, now I'm not a Baltimore cop, but I know some. But to me, that's the most realistic police show I've ever seen my entire life. Forget about movie or anything else. That's it. Wire. And then the other shows that I like, or I suggest to people that they may not be so realistic, are shows where detectives are actually using their heads. So you may have a show like True Detective with Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, or the last season with Jodie Foster. They're entertainment, don't get me wrong, but it shows detectives trying to use their head and solving a case and not giving up, and putting everything they have into solving that case, and caring, the most important thing, caring about your victim, living or dead, caring about your victim, because that's why the taxpayer pays you money. That's why your taxpayer pays you a pension. So if you're going to do it and you're going to take that job, and like the NYPD, we had unlimited sick leave. When I broke my leg, I'm out for 4 months. I get full pay. I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to worry about compensation, workers' comp. So the point is, what I'm trying to say is, you take that job, it's good benefits, it's good pay. People are paying you. Taxpayers are paying you money. You owe them. And to this day, I will tell you this, Chris. There are cases, and I may not be like every detective, but I know my partner from Special Victims is very similar. we bear the burden of cases that are unsolved. The solved cases, the cases where I put guys away, the right guys for a long time, I don't think about much. Sometimes I do, but I really don't in passing, you know. The cases that I think about are the one where 16 women depended on me to solve a serial rape case. Still unsolved. DNA indicted,
Wow.
DNA unsolved. 2.5 years straight working hard on it. And to this day, it's a burden that I bear, and I take that, and I take full responsibility. It's my case.
And then you know it's the same guy. Wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yep. And you know what? I'll say this. I had some of my old like TV reels, America's Most Wanted. I was on with this case and some of the other stuff. And I gave it to my cousin and I asked him, could you save this? Because it was on VHS. So he managed to get it up on like a YouTube channel. People can go to it, you know. But anyway, on there is a case, the East Side Rapist case is called, on the Upper East Side, 16 rapes. And they're unsolved. And after all this time. And anyway, somebody wrote, is this case, one day a notification popped up I saw, and I said, oh, let me see. Somebody said, is this solved? I said, no, it's my responsibility. It hasn't been solved yet, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then next thing I see, the next day, another notification comes up, and you know who it is? Somebody who's a victim. I know her from somewhere else, another country now, and says, John, you and John did, you know, so-and-so, you know, the best you could, and you really helped us, or whatever the case may be. It made me feel good, you know, for a minute that, you know, that she felt like this, but it's still, you know, a burden that I bear. And, you know, maybe I'm different than everybody else. Sometimes I think I am, but to this day, I think about it, you know.
Yep. Well, it's certainly been interesting. Well, it's been great talking to you, John.
Thanks, Chris.
Where any place where you have any websites or anything out there where we can find you on the net or anything? Or
I have my business site. I'm not looking for business, but I just to find me and look at me and look me up. Anybody can find me all over. But NYPDtruth.com, NYPDtruth.com. It's my expert site. Not doing much business on it, so but people are welcome to take a look at it. You know, but yeah, I'm just happy to talk. I like to talk and talk to people like you who are interested, ask good questions, and I appreciate you asking very good, pointed questions. They're excellent.
Yeah. There's been a lot of interest. It's an interesting topic that gets close to my heart. Please like the channel, subscribe to the video, check out my Substack, and go buy my novel, Escape from the Village. Thank you, John Baeza. I'm Chris Baker, and we're out.